It can be difficult judging a person's personality when you first meet them. Hello, sir. My name is Charles A. Mahan, and I think you are a horse's behind. Well, it can also get you into a mess of trouble if you judge too quickly. Ticklish. Yes, ticklish. That is the best word I can come up with to describe the folks I worked with in Henderson County those first 2 years. Ticklish. Some people might say stubborn, or cantankerous, or mulish. But none of those words ever felt quite right. None of those words told the whole story in the end. But ticklish. You see, the local farmers, they had never met the likes of me before. When it came to running their farms, there was one school of thought. Well, like I said, that's how my grandpa did it, and his grandpa did it, and his grandpa before him. Well, who was I to come in riding on my red twin-cylinder motorcycle and tell them how to tend their farms? Who was I indeed? You see, I learned early on that I had to find some way to earn the trust of these farmers. You see, the information and research I was sharing, to some it felt like a slap in the face, going against years of family history and tradition. And those farmers, they took great pride in this history and tradition. Some might call that stubborn, but I like to call it ticklish. I do remember one Friday morning, I was riding out early to have a farm visit out in, I believe it was Hebbardsville. That is something I will never forget. Riding through those beautiful rolling hills. It was breathtaking. And it was quite a bit more pleasant than when I first started in Henderson County and had to ride everywhere in a horse and buggy. There is nothing more pleasant than staring at a horse's behind for a good couple hours in the morning to get your day started off right. Well, as I made my way down the long, dusty road up to the farm, I could see two figures out in the distance. One appeared to be a younger man, no older than 15, 16, and the other looked to be probably about in his 40s or so. Little did I know, that man would come to remind me very fondly of those horses' behinds I used to stare at for hours upon end. Now, Mr. Akers had asked me out to take a look at his orchard. Now, this orchard had been in his family for generations. And as we toured the land, he took great pride in recounting stories of his father and his brothers and their father and his brothers and so on and so on. And to be quite honest, I found his stories quite interesting, although a bit dry. Well, as we continued the tour, I soon realized that Mr. Akers seemed uncomfortable asking for my opinion, and for that matter, unwilling to admit there was a problem at all. Well, after a good bit of talking, he finally looked at me and said that over the past 2 seasons, the orchard hadn't been quite so productive. That's it. That's all he said. Then he stopped and looked me square in the eye and said, "Well, what would you do to fix it?" Well, it felt like his demeanor had suddenly changed. It felt like the stories of fathers and brothers and cousins and Uncle Henry's were gone, and suddenly a gauntlet had been thrown down. This was a challenge. So, luckily, during our tour, with a few well-placed questions from me, I had come to the conclusion that the orchard was in great need of pruning. Well, as I started to share the benefits of pruning, I started to notice Mr. Akers' shoulders were tensing up and his brow began to furrow. My worst fear was coming true. I was losing him. I was insulting him. And suddenly, he stopped me mid-sentence and said, "Well, my father didn't prune those trees, and his grandfather didn't prune those trees, so why should I prune those trees?" Oh, it was happening. And I swear his face was beet red, and I could see the hair on the back of his neck just standing up. Oh. And then he looked me square in the eye and said, "I bet you don't even know what you're talking about." Ha! Bet. I found my way in. I quickly made a friendly wager with him and said, "I bet that in 2 years' time, a tree that I prune would yield more fruit than any of your trees on either side." There was silence. Then slowly, without a word, he extended his hand, and I shook it. So, for the rest of the afternoon, I taught his son how to prune and spent a good afternoon working there. And then at the end of the day, I left that orchard and vowed to never return again because I had seen the horses behind. Well, 2 years passed. And one Saturday afternoon while I was in town, I came across Mr. Akers and his son. Well, without hesitation, the younger Mr. Akers came up immediately with a warm handshake and a friendly hello. Not too far behind him came his father. Not a word was said, but he slowly extended his hand, and I shook it. And with a smile, he said, "Thank you," and walked away. However, his son stayed just a moment longer, just long enough to say, "You were right," with a big sly smile on his face. You know, some people might call Mr. Akers stubborn or cantankerous or mulish or a horse's behind. But none of those words came to mind that day. No, because I was tickled. You know, it amazes me just how many stories over the years have put a smile on my face. Extension has given me a gateway to truly touch people's lives. You know, I remember I had the opportunity to work with this wonderful young woman, very talented, named Mary Ellen. Now, Mary Ellen had recently become engaged to a very promising young farmer named Bill, who had taken over his family's farm after his parents had passed away, which was no small undertaking for such a young man. Shortly before this young couple was able to start their lives together, Bill was taken tragically in an accident. Well, I heard of Mary's situation through the other farmers and homemakers in the county, and I just knew that I had to reach out to her. Well, that first day I arrived on her farm, I don't know what I expected to find. I suppose I expected to find a distraught young woman trying to figure out what to do next. But what I found that day was, well, it was nothing short of extraordinary. You see, as I made my way up the road to her house, I could see over in the tomato patch a young woman on her knees, all by herself, not another soul in sight. So I parked my motorcycle by the porch, and I made my way over to her. She was clumsily fumbling with the vines, wiping her head, fumbling with the vines. She was working hard. She was covered in dirt and sweat, and you could tell it had already been a long day's work. Well, when she noticed me standing there, she stopped, wiped the sweat from her forehead, and stood up. Well, I extended my hand to help her, and I said, "Hello, ma'am. My name's Charles Mahan." And she looked at me straight in the eye with strength and determination. And she said, "Yes, sir, I know who you are, and I need your help." Well, with those simple words, I began working with Mary Ellen. And that time was amazing. Within the next week, we had collected over 1,000 tin cans. I'd helped her acquire a pressure cooker and a soldering iron, and, well, we eventually moved past the tomatoes. She wanted to learn everything, how to do it herself. I had never seen such a thirst for learning. And every day that we worked together, she would look at me with the biggest smile on her face and say, "Bill would love this." You know, those first 2 years in Henderson County, well, they taught me so much. But no, taught isn't really the right word for it. Those 2 years, those people, their families, their stories, they gave me so much. As I moved on to other counties and other positions within Extension, I found that those first lessons and stories, they molded my thinking and my philosophy on what we do and how we do it. It is our job to make local leaders, safe, sane local leaders, who can be trusted to think things through, see both sides of a question, and to be trusted to give wise counsel and leadership to their fellow man. Now, if we do our jobs well, we become more than extension agents. We become a trusted part of a community. We become a family. I consider myself blessed to have learned how to see past the horses behind and discover those incredible people that we work with on a daily basis. Those proud, intelligent, dedicated, caring, funny, hardworking, and ticklish people. Thank you.